When people hear a title like this, they expect a reveal, a single item, a berry from a remote mountain, a seed that monks have guarded for centuries, something rare, expensive, and slightly magical. That expectation tells us more about our psychology than it does about nutrition. We are drawn to shortcuts. We want the one lever that moves everything, the pill, the hack, the one weird trick. It feels efficient, it feels modern, and it feels comforting because it lets us believe that change doesn't require change. But the truth is less glamorous and far more powerful. Longevity is not built on a superfood. It's built on a pattern. Every population that consistently reaches old age in good health, whether in Okinawa, Sardinia, Ikaria, or Loma Linda, shares one trait above all others. Not a specific ingredient, not a trendy diet, a rhythm, a way of eating that repeats day after day, year after year. Their meals are built around simple, whole foods, vegetables, fruits, beans, grains, nuts. The foods themselves vary by culture, climate, and history, but the structure stays the same. That structure is what matters. We underestimate the power of repetition. We think change happens through intensity, through dramatic overhauls and bold declarations. But biology doesn't respond to drama, it responds to signals. What you eat once sends a message. What you eat every day becomes an instruction manual. Your body is not keeping score of your best days, it is averaging your habits. If you eat well sometimes and poorly most of the time, your body doesn't experience balance. It experiences stress, and stress in biology is cumulative. The same is true in the other direction. You don't need perfection, you need reliability. A handful of good foods eaten consistently does more for your future than a week of clean eating followed by a month of neglect. This is where the idea of a superfood quietly falls apart. It invites us to outsource responsibility. We place hope in an object instead of a behavior. We ask, what should I add? Instead of what pattern am I living inside? And patterns are harder to face because they reflect us back to ourselves. They expose what we do when no one is watching. They show us the story our habits are telling. There's also a deeper illusion at work, the belief that complexity equals effectiveness. We assume that because the human body is intricate, the solution must be exotic. But evolution rarely works that way. The systems that last are the ones that are simple enough to repeat. The foods that sustained humans for thousands of years were not rare. They were ordinary, they were local, they were boring in the best possible way. A diet that depends on novelty cannot become a lifestyle. A lifestyle must be boring enough to maintain. That's not a failure of imagination. It's a design principle. The goal is not to impress yourself. The goal is to build something you don't have to think about. Notice how this reframes discipline. Instead of asking you to be strong every day, it asks you to be sensible once. You choose a pattern that is gentle enough to live inside. And then you let time do the heavy lifting. You stop negotiating with yourself at every meal. You stop needing motivation. The decision has already been made. This is why people who live the longest rarely talk about dieting. They eat what their culture has always eaten. The food fits into their identity. It's not a project, it's just lunch, and identity is powerful. When you think of yourself as someone trying to eat better, every meal becomes a test. When you think of yourself as someone who eats simply, every meal becomes a confirmation. One feels fragile, the other feels stable. The modern food environment fights this stability. It is engineered to keep you chasing novelty, new flavors, new textures, new promises. It trains your brain to expect stimulation at every bite. In that world, a bowl of beans and vegetables can feel like a punishment, not because it lacks value, but because your expectations have been distorted. Rebuilding a pattern is partly a nutritional act and partly a psychological one. You are teaching your mind that ordinary can be enough, that repetition is not deprivation, that health is not a performance, but a practice. And this is where longevity quietly begins, not in a revelation, but in a return to foods that look like what they are, a return to meals you could explain to a child, a return to eating that doesn't require a manual. You don't need to know the biochemistry to benefit from it. You only need to notice one thing: what you repeat becomes you. Every day you are casting a vote for the person you will be in 20, 30, 40 years. Not with grand gestures, but with small, unremarkable choices. an apple instead of a packaged bar, beans instead of processed meat, water instead of sugar. These are not dramatic, they are directional, and direction is destiny. The promise of a superfood is that it can rescue you from your patterns. The truth is that only a better pattern can do that. One that doesn't rely on willpower, doesn't demand obsession, and doesn't collapse when life gets busy. You don't need a miracle. You need a rhythm you can live with. Because the future is not built by what you do once. It is built by what you do when nothing special is happening. Once you accept that longevity is built on patterns, the next question becomes obvious. What kind of pattern actually works? When we zoom out and study the longest living populations on Earth, something striking appears. Their diets are not just simple, they are overwhelmingly plant-centered. Not necessarily vegetarian in the modern ideological sense, but anchored in foods that grow from the ground. This isn't a moral argument, it's an observational one. Across cultures, across climates, across centuries, the people who live the longest and stay functional the latest in life eat meals built around vegetables, beans, whole grains, fruits, and nuts. Animal foods exist, but they play a supporting role, not the starring one. Meat is flavor, not foundation. The plate is mostly plants. Why does this matter? Because your body is not just a machine that burns calories, it is an ecosystem. Trillions of microorganisms live inside you, shaping your immune system, your metabolism, even your mood. And those organisms eat what you eat. When you feed them fiber-rich plant foods, you cultivate a microbial environment that reduces chronic inflammation, improves insulin sensitivity, and protects the lining of your gut. When you feed them ultra-processed foods, sugar, and excess saturated fat, you cultivate a very different internal climate, one that quietly pushes the body toward disease. This isn't about purity, it's about direction. Plants contain thousands of bioactive compounds, polyphenols, antioxidants, phytonutrients that act less like drugs and more like signals. They tell your cells how to behave. They encourage repair over damage, balance over chaos. You don't feel these effects immediately. That's what makes them easy to ignore. But biology is patient. It keeps the receipts. A plant-centered diet works the way interest works in a bank account. The gains are small, the timeline is long, and then, one day, the difference is undeniable. What makes this powerful is that it doesn't rely on extremes. You don't need to renounce entire food groups or adopt an identity. You only need to change the center of gravity on your plate. Let plants be the default. Let everything else orbit around them. Psychologically, this is liberating. It reframes health as addition, not restriction. You are not constantly asking, what must I avoid? You are asking, what can I build this meal around? Beans become the base. Vegetables become the volume. Whole grains become the structure. Flavor becomes something you layer on, not something you chase. This shift changes your relationship with food. You stop seeing meals as rewards or indulgences and start seeing them as forms of self-communication. Every plate says something to your future self. It says, I'm investing, or I'm borrowing, or I'm ignoring. And the body understands these messages, even when the mind doesn't. There is also a quiet humility in plant-based eating that mirrors how longevity actually works. Plants grow slowly, they respond to seasons, they reward patience, they are not engineered for instant gratification. When your diet is built on them, your expectations subtly change. You become more tolerant of gradual progress. You stop demanding overnight transformation. That mindset is protective. It guards you against the cycle of enthusiasm and collapse that defines so many health journeys. You are no longer trying to conquer your biology. You are collaborating with it. This is why the longest living cultures rarely speak in terms of optimization. They speak in terms of normality. Their food is not healthy. It is just food. Their habits are not disciplined. They are inherited. Health emerges as a side effect of a life that makes sense. In contrast, modern eating often feels adversarial. We eat against ourselves. We override satiety. We negotiate with cravings. We swing between control and surrender. A plant-centered pattern gently dissolves that conflict. The volume and fiber of these foods naturally regulate appetite. You feel full without being heavy, energized without being wired, satisfied without being overstimulated. This matters because willpower is not a renewable resource. Any system that depends on constant resistance, will eventually fail. A system that works with your physiology has a chance to last. The deeper lesson is philosophical. Longevity is not about adding years to life. It is about reducing friction inside the body so that life can unfold without constant repair. Plants do that work quietly. They lower the background noise of inflammation. They make the body's job easier. And when the body's job is easier, it lasts longer. You don't need to become someone else to eat this way. You only need to let what grows become what guides. Let your meals be grounded in what the earth produces naturally, and let everything else become occasional. Because the future you are building does not need perfection. It needs alignment. And alignment begins the moment you decide that what grows is what sustains. If plant-centered eating is the structure, fiber is the invisible architecture holding it together. It is the element most people never think about and the one their bodies miss the most. In modern life, fiber has become optional, almost decorative. We speak about protein with reverence, fat with fear or fascination, sugar with guilt. Fiber rarely enters the conversation, and yet, from the perspective of human biology, it may be the single most important daily signal you send to your body. Fiber is not glamorous because it doesn't act like a stimulant. It doesn't give you a rush. It doesn't create an immediate sensation you can point to and say, that's working. Instead, it works in the background, shaping systems rather than moments. It governs how your gut communicates with your immune system. It influences how stable your energy feels across the day. It determines how hospitable your internal environment is to health. In a sense, fiber is how you speak to the future. What makes fiber unique is that you don't digest it. You pass it along to the microbial world inside you. Those organisms then transform it into compounds that regulate inflammation, strengthen the gut barrier, and influence hormones involved in hunger and mood. This is not metaphorical, it is chemical. The absence of fiber doesn't just change digestion, it changes who you are hosting inside your own body. And the body always adapts to what it is given. When fiber is scarce, your gut microbiome becomes less diverse. The protective species shrink. The inflammatory ones gain ground. The lining of the gut becomes more permeable. The immune system becomes more reactive. These changes don't announce themselves, they accumulate. They appear years later as fatigue, metabolic dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline. When fiber is abundant, the opposite pattern emerges. Diversity increases, inflammation quiets, blood sugar stabilizes, appetite becomes easier to manage. The body feels less like a battlefield and more like a coordinated system. This is why fiber is so central to longevity. It is not treating a problem, it is shaping an environment. Psychologically, this matters back. Oz. It reframes health as cultivation rather than correction. You are not constantly fixing what is broken. You are growing what protects. Every bowl of oats, every serving of beans, every apple, every handful of greens becomes an act of ecosystem management. You are tending something alive inside you. That perspective changes behavior. It replaces guilt with responsibility. You are no longer being good or being bad. You are feeding a community. And communities respond to consistency, not heroics. One of the tragedies of modern eating is that it trains us to value intensity over stability. We seek foods that excite, overwhelm, and distract. Fiber does none of these things. It is quiet. It slows digestion. It smooths curves. It asks you to be patient. In a culture addicted to immediacy, patience feels like deprivation, but the body is built for slow processes. Healing is slow, adaptation is slow, aging is slow. Fiber aligns with that tempo. It teaches your physiology that there is no emergency. That energy will come, that fullness can be trusted, that the future is not a threat. This has behavioral consequences. When your blood sugar is stable, your emotional landscape becomes more stable. Cravings soften, decision fatigue decreases, you become less reactive. The mind experiences this as calm. The body experiences it as safety. And safety is fertile ground for long-term change. Most people try to manage eating through control. They count, restrict, compensate. 5. R works from the opposite direction. It creates natural boundaries, it fills the stomach, it slows absorption. It tells the brain that enough has arrived. Instead of fighting appetite, you partner with it. This is why the foods richest in fiber, beans, lentils, vegetables, berries, whole grains, appear again and again in long-living cultures. They are not just nutritious, they are regulating. They make overeating difficult and undernourishment unlikely. They build a middle path into the meal itself. There is a philosophical lesson here. The systems that last are the ones that regulate themselves. They do not depend on constant supervision. Fiber is a form of internal governance. It keeps extremes in check. It creates balance without force. When you remove fiber from a diet, you remove that governance. The body becomes easier to overstimulate and harder to satisfy. Hunger becomes louder. Fullness becomes less reliable. The relationship with food turns adversarial. You begin to manage yourself instead of trusting yourself. Longevity does not emerge from that posture. It emerges from coherence. Adding fiber is not dramatic. It does not require an announcement. It requires a shift in what you consider real food. Whole foods contain fiber by default. Processed foods remove it by design. Every time you choose the whole version, you are choosing a different internal climate. An orange instead of juice. Oats instead of flakes. Beans instead of refined starch. These are not upgrades. They are returns. And returns compound. You do not need to chase youth. You need to build conditions that allow your body to age slowly. Fiber does that quietly, daily, without asking for attention. It is the difference between forcing the system and supporting it. And in the end, longevity belongs to what you can repeat. So feed what protects you, because what you nourish today becomes the biology you live in tomorrow. Once you understand the power of patterns, plants, and fiber, a new question quietly emerges. Why do we make this so complicated? Look at the modern health landscape. It is crowded with protocols, powders, stacks, biohacks, and branded solutions. Every year introduces a new villain, a new miracle, a new system you must master to stay ahead of your own biology. Health becomes a project, a second job, something you are always slightly behind on. But when you step back and observe the people who actually live the longest, the contrast is striking. Their food is not complicated. It is not optimized. It is not tracked. It is ordinary. Rice, beans, potatoes, greens, fruit, bread made from grain, not chemistry. Meals that would not look impressive on social media. Foods that have been eaten in some form for centuries. And yet these simple foods outperform our complexity. This reveals something uncomfortable. Much of what we call advanced nutrition is not about effectiveness. It is about novelty. It keeps us engaged. It keeps us consuming. It keeps us believing that the next thing will finally fix what the last thing did not. Simplicity, by contrast, offers no drama. It does not flatter the ego. It does not make you feel like an insider. It simply works. There is a psychological resistance to this. We associate value with effort. If something is easy, we assume it must be weak. If something is powerful, we expect it to be hard. But longevity does not reward intensity. It rewards continuity. A plan that looks perfect on paper but collapses in real life is not a plan. It is a fantasy. The foods that sustain a long life must fit into ordinary days. Days when you are tired. Days when you are busy. Days when motivation is absent. The measure of a diet is not how well it performs in ideal conditions. It is how it behaves when you are human. Simple foods excel here. They are available, they are affordable, they are adaptable. You can eat them in many combinations without thinking. They do not require constant education. They do not expire as trends. This reduces friction, and friction is the enemy of habit. Every additional rule you add increases the chance of abandonment. Every layer of complexity creates a decision point, and every decision point is an opportunity for fatigue. Over time, fatigue always wins. This is not a failure of character. It is a feature of the mind. The human brain evolved to conserve energy. It prefers defaults. It resists constant deliberation. When your eating requires vigilance, it becomes vulnerable to stress. When your eating is automatic, it becomes resilient. That is the hidden strength of simple food. It becomes invisible. It stops occupying mental space. It allows health to run in the background of your life instead of sitting in the foreground like a task. Philosophically, this is profound. It suggests that the goal is not to build a perfect system, it is to build a livable one. A livable system does not demand your attention, it supports your attention, it frees you to think about other things, relationships, work, curiosity, meaning. The longest living people do not spend their days managing their health, they live their lives. Health is a side effect of coherence. Modern culture reverses this. We live in service of health strategies. We track, measure, optimize. We become caretakers of ourselves rather than inhabitants of ourselves. Simple eating returns agency. It says, you do not need to be an expert to participate in your own longevity. You do not need special access. You do not need constant upgrades. You need a handful of foods you can return to again and again. There is dignity in that. A bowl of lentils, a plate of vegetables, a piece of fruit. These are not compromises. They are foundations. They have carried entire civilizations. They have sustained people through work, through age, through change. They ask very little of you. They give a great deal in return. And there is something psychologically stabilizing about trusting what has lasted. In a world of rapid change, simple food is a form of continuity. It links you to generations who ate to live, not to perform. It grounds you in a rhythm that predates marketing. This does not mean you must reject pleasure. Simple food can be rich, warm, comforting, deeply satisfying. What it rejects is excess masquerading as sophistication. It reminds you that nourishment is not entertainment. When you embrace simplicity, you stop chasing health. You start inhabiting it. You no longer ask, what is the best possible choice? You ask, what is a good choice I can repeat? That shift is everything, because repetition is what builds a life. Complexity feels powerful in the moment. Simplicity is powerful over time, and time is the only medium longevity cares about. So choose what you can live with, because the future is not shaped by what impresses you today, but by what quietly carries you forward tomorrow.